Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to episode 5 of the Breaking the Game podcast. We're your host. I am Stephen Gillespie, and joining me as he does pretty regularly now is Austin Carr. Austin, what's going on, man?
Not a whole lot, man. It's been a nice day. Some good basketball games on. How about you? How you been?
I've been doing all right, man. Just so we can put it out there, All Aspect Sports has been put on hold for a little while now. And, it's sat on my end. I know that, all the guys that we had contributing to the website, put in a lot of hard work, and it was a really tough decision to do that. But, we have to just kind of roll with the punches and be available. And, we got the opportunity to where we're working with a couple different places. Austin, just do you want to let everyone know where your work is being published and things like that?
Yeah, I joined another sports network. It's called the Game Changer Sports Network. You can find it on Facebook and Twitter. And they have a website. It's just GameChangerSportsNetwork.com. They cover pretty much every sport you can think of. They've got pretty large group of guys over there. They just started some live shows as well. I think they have a weekly schedule on the website. You can check that out if you're interested. But we're doing a lot of good work over there, and I know you're doing a lot of good work too. We got our show, so if you want to tell them a little bit about that, or we're doing that now.
Yeah, so our show, you can find it. It's being posted on my buddy Chris LeBron's network, the Off the Ball Network. You can find us on there, and I've put up some written work already. I did a big board of the top 100 players. Basically, that same document I shared with you, Austin, is up on the website. And I did a mock draft of the first and the second round, and I appreciate the love there, Billy. Good to see you, man. But yeah, you can just check out the work that we have going on at all of our different places. The Game Changer Sports Network. A couple of the guys that we had on All Aspect Sports got picked up over there, which was good to see. And then obviously the Off the Ball Network. You've seen me work with them several times, and a great group of guys, and couldn't be happier to be publishing my work there. But now that we have our introductions and our work out of the way, Austin, we've had some great NBA games since we last recorded on Wednesday.
Yes, we have. We've had a lot of good action, and I think we've had 2 games for every series, not counting today, obviously, excluding today.
Right, excluding the Celtics today. And we were recording on the 23rd if you're watching or listening later.
And, spoiler alert, but the Celtics swept the 76ers, so we can talk about that next show. But the games 2 and 3 for each series happened. They were, a lot of exciting games. Some went exactly how I thought they would. Some not so much. I think we're going to go ahead and get into the first series here. We got Toronto and Brooklyn. That's what we were going to talk about first. You want to start us off, Steven?
Yeah, absolutely. So right now Toronto has a 3-0 lead on the Brooklyn basketball team, which is what we've been affectionately referring to the Brooklyn Nets as now, with all the injuries and, decisions to not go to Orlando and play. There's been some pretty interesting games that we've seen between these games. A couple of them were close, particularly game 2. It was only decided by 5 points and a late defensive effort by the, Toronto Raptors. But, game 3 showed a little bit more of who the Toronto Raptors are, right, Austin?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My thoughts on this series, really, I'm not surprised that the outcomes, a little bit surprised that they've been blowouts the way they have in 2 of the 3 games. Mm-hmm. The Nets are a scrappy team. They're missing a lot of guys, but they do, they play hard. It doesn't seem really like they have a number one option, which is, I know, something that you've been saying a little bit. And that's hard in the playoffs. You got to have a go-to guy. It doesn't really seem like they do. Obviously, they're all hurt or not playing. They would have a couple go-to guys if they were here, but
right,
they don't have them. And I just think Toronto has shown why a lot of people are picking them to go to the NBA Finals. They look like a champion. They play every minute hard. They don't really let up on you at all. Like you said, they're great defensively. Siakam hasn't even really had that good of a series for him, and they're still, running away with this. So I was a little surprised that it's been as much of a blowout as it's been in 2 of the 3 games, but not so much that Toronto's up 3-0.
Right, absolutely. Van Vliet's put up 24 and 22 in these last two games that we haven't had a chance to cover. Siakam put up 19 and 26. So, he's kind of hit and miss a little bit. If you look at the statistics of how the teams have played, right, the Raptors have led in points in the paint in both games, which is not really a surprise considering the lack of depth that the Nets have, in their front court. The Raptors have won both games despite shooting under 70% from the free throw line at 67 and 63%. And, something like that I take into consideration when I evaluate who they're going to be playing next, which in all likelihood is going to be the Boston Celtics, right? Depending on, if Brooklyn doesn't shock the world and, win out from here on out, right?
Right.
Brooklyn had 13 and 17 turnovers in these two losses, right? And the rebounding differential hasn't really been too significant. Brooklyn actually out-rebounded the Raptors by 2 and held Toronto to 25% deep in one game, right? And Toronto actually had 21 fouls in each of these two games. So, you're looking at them dominate a beaten-up low-seed team in the East, but you have to consider how this is going to translate to when competition is really going to ramp up in the second round of the Eastern Conference.
Right, and that's a great point, Stephen. We haven't really seen how well they can play against a team that's equally talented as them. Obviously Brooklyn has talent, but most of it's on the shelf right now. And like you said, they're beating up on a already beaten up team. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to see how they can translate this to the second round against a Boston team that looks like they're hitting on all cylinders, even with the loss of Gordon Hayward. It doesn't seem like it's really affected them. I'm sure it will coming up in the later rounds because obviously Toronto is extremely well coached. Nick Nurse won Coach of the Year. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, I did. Well deserved, in my opinion. I know that you had eyes for somebody else, but
hey, I think the way these series have been playing out has been kind of proving you right. So, pat yourself on the back for that one.
I won't break my arm yet, but we could do that maybe a little bit later on in the playoffs.
But, I said all along he'd be a great choice too, and I'd have no issue with it. And I think you've seen throughout the year that Toronto can throw so many different looks at you offensively and defensively. They can do everything. Fred VanVleet looks like a star in the making. Mm-hmm. Like you said last week, he's a plug and play guy. You can just put him in any offense and he's going to thrive. They've got to shoot better from the free throw line. They definitely need to avoid another game where they shoot, under 30% from three if they want to beat Boston. Boston can really score. They're an extremely effective defensive team as well. They're a little bit undersized, which might not bode well for them against Toronto, but we just saw them dominate a team with Joel Embiid. So
correct.
I'm not too worried about that. And the only matchup that in recent memory that these two teams did have was in the bubble, and Boston did beat them by 20. So, that's a little telling, but things change. It's a 7-game series is a long time, and it's hard to beat anybody 4 times.
Yeah, 100%. And right now, I think if you're Toronto, you have to be concerned about your fouls, your turnovers, and your free throw percentage, right? Because you can't play at that level and shoot those percentages or have those numbers in those areas and repeat as a champion in this NBA right now, right? And you just want to say shout out to Chris LeBron, president of the Off the Ball Network, or CEO, whichever title you prefer, Chris. I appreciate you tuning in, man. It's always nice to see you, brother. But, when we're talking about this Toronto potential, Boston and Toronto matchup, is nothing is official yet. You have to look at the depth that Toronto has, right, when you evaluate this matchup, Austin, because they have a number of guys that can put up double-digit figures. They've had a lot of guys step up and play well, and they do have the perimeter defenders in Lowry, in VanVleet, and Anunoby to give Kemba, Brown, and Tatum a run for their money, and that's something that Philadelphia was lacking. But we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Let's wrap up this Toronto series. Do you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to say about this one?
I think we've pretty much touched on everything. You do make a good point. It seems a little odd that a team that is so well coached has been struggling at doing those little things that winning teams winning teams do. They've kind of struggled to do those things, like you said, with the turnovers, the fouls, the free throw percentage. But I think those are things that they'll correct in the next round. So I'm good to move on if you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And the next series that we're going to talk about is one that I think that we both thought was going to go a very different way than what it is right now, and that is that Denver-Utah matchup. Utah leads the series 2-1. You know, the last two games that we did not cover were both victories for the Utah Jazz, where they defeated the Denver Nuggets 124-105, and then an absolute blowout at 124-87. Austin, what are your thoughts about the way that these last two games have gone?
I'm pretty surprised. I think you are a little bit too. I think we're both pretty high on Denver when this series started, and I at least was not very high on Utah. That first game, I'm surprised it didn't kind of break their spirit a little bit when Mitchell had 57 and they still lost.
Right.
But they came back, and, give credit to Jordan Clarkson. He's looked terrific. And off the bench, that 26-point game. Rudy Gobert's played well.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Conley Jr. has really been the difference, though, I think. And that's really shown, obviously missing your starting point guard is going to really change the way you do things on offense. And it gives Mitchell that second player that can come in and take some pressure off of him to, lead the offense and run plays. And he obviously shot the lights out of the ball, so he must have been excited to come back and play.
Well, right. He just got back from the birth of a child, and there was a lot of concerns. Is he going to make this game or not? By all accounts, when you look at the timeline that was presented to him, having to quarantine for about 4 days, having the test every day, and then, having to support your wife having a baby. Basically everything worked out about as perfect as you could imagine. He finished, his first game back with 27 points, shot 7 of 8 from downtown, which is a playoff career high for him. And we know he's been in the playoffs for quite some time now with the Memphis Grizzlies before this. And it speaks to how much having just another, shot creator for yourself or others can take a lot of pressure off of a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who you mentioned had that 57-point first game, which was, a historical achievement, but still resulted in a loss. And Rudy Gobert in the second game of these two that we covered, he had 24 and 14. And, you and I kind of beat him up a little bit about not being an offensive number two for this team. But, when you have a fully healthy Jazz team minus, a Bogdanovich, right, he doesn't have to basically create his own offense. He can be on the receiving end and convert, and he did that in game 3.
Right, and something that I wanted to talk about a little bit too, you made a good point of in our notes, is the coaching of this series. I think it's been a glaring difference where what I thought this series would look like from what it's really been. I kind of expected, we knew what Denver was. We know what they're about on offense. They're a high scoring, they're a potent team, they're deep. They seem like they had everything going pretty well for them other than health. And it seems like they're getting healthier as the playoffs go on, and they've kind of fallen apart on offense. Whereas the Jazz, Quinn Snyder has done an awesome job of making adjustments since game 1, of keeping his guys in the game, not letting things get worse than they already were. And, I think that's been a big, obvious difference. And it's really surprising to me that Denver doesn't really seem to have an identity on offense. You would think that they should run their offense through Jokic, which they did all year. And it just seems like they've kind of gotten away from that, and it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me.
Yeah, you're 100% right. That was one of the biggest things that I took away from the series so far, is that Utah, even with the injuries and the absentees that they've had, they have a clearer identity than the Denver Nuggets. It seems like, Jokic, Porter Jr., and Murray are their biggest talents, obviously, correct? So, but when you see these guys, they almost seem to want to just take turns, but no one wants to basically assert themselves as being the initial playmaker. And they're all capable of doing this, right? Like, Jokic and Porter are the only players with over 20 points for Denver within either game. Both of them had over 20 points in the first game. Jokic is the only one that has consistently scored on this roster. And then In the second game, Jokic, Murray, and Bol were the only players in double figures. So it seems like the offense, they're still trying to figure this out. You know, when your two-way second-round draft pick, Bol comes in and is your, third or fourth leading scorer with 11 points, that tells you a little bit about the way that things are going. And it's just been difficult to watch. And when you consider the seed that Denver is being number third, and they're playing against the sixth seed, it looks like it's almost the other way around when you consider the way that these past few games have gone.
Right, that's a good point. It definitely it does feel like the seeds should be flip-flopped. I think they should be running their whole offense through Jokic, every time down the court. Honestly, I think Murray's a little too streaky. He can get hot and look incredible, but he has long, cold stretches too. And Michael Porter Jr. is technically still just a rookie. He's got a long way to go. And so they're relying on, what look like a lot of great side pieces, but no real, superstar centerpiece. Jokic,
no main chick is what you're saying. They have all these side pieces, exactly. But no main chick.
Or maybe they do have a couple main chicks, and they just need to pick one, and ride with them. I like that analogy. That's good. But you got to think, Denver laid an egg in Game 3. They looked
absolutely
awful.
Yes,
and it's going to say a lot about that team and their coach, whether or not they can come back in the next game and how they play. And if they roll over and die, I wouldn't be surprised if Malone's on the hot seat there.
Yeah, absolutely. And my buddy Stephen Wayne came on here and gave a pretty decent analysis of the way that Jokic has been playing on the defensive end. That he said he's slow and lazy. I wouldn't necessarily go that far, but he does get exposed a lot on the defensive end. I do believe that he is a true superstar. We have superstars in the NBA that are just offensive talents, I think that Jokic could grow to be a serviceable defensive big in his own way, but he's not going to be the anchor. You have to have other pieces, and when you have guys like Murray and Porter Jr. out there who are also kind of the same way, they could probably be good help pieces on defense. Neither one of these guys are true defensive stoppers on the perimeter or in the post. And I disagree with you a little bit on who Denver should run their offense through. When you watch these late game situations when they're trying to get back into these games, Michael Porter Jr., when he gets aggressive and assertive, it's hard for him to miss a shot because of his length and the position that he plays. You're down 2-1 anyway, and you've been trying to run your offense through Nikola Jokic for most of the series. I might try to just run my offense through Michael Porter Jr. and Nikola Jokic pick and rolls and just kind of see, what happens.
Yeah, they've got to try something. They need, something to give them a spark. And, to your point about needing a defensive anchor, maybe not an anchor, but at least, a rim protector and a nice backstop. I think Bol could turn into that for them, obviously, with his size.
He's got to get a little stronger, though. He's pretty frail.
Definitely. And that comes usually with time in the NBA. Most guys, tend to put on quite a bit of weight in their first few years. So we'll see where that goes. I just think, like it's kind of always been with Denver, they've got a lot of really good pieces. They never seem to be healthy all at once, and they never seem to be playing well all at the same time. It's like you said, they kind of take turns. And in the playoffs, defenses really ratchet up big time. Games slow down, and a team that does most of the time tend to just kind of outscore their opponents. That becomes a lot harder to do, especially against a team like Utah with Rudy Gobert, who's obviously, if not the best, one of the 2 or 3 best defensive centers in basketball.
Right, he's still my vote for Defensive Player of the Year, and I think that he's showing that in this series, that he is still that top level guy. I know that voter fatigue can play a part in decision making and stuff like that, and the stuff that Giannis is doing, it would certainly bode well historically for him to earn that award. But right. I still think that Rudy Gobert is doing a great job. And one other piece or actually a couple of pieces I want to touch on real quick. They're just real quick statistics, Austin's, and we can move on. Denver's defense obviously was exposed in both of these games. They committed more fouls in both of these games and allowed over 51% from the floor in both of these games. It's not a winning recipe, obviously. The Jazz moved the ball better than they did in game one. They recorded 32 and 27 assists in each game. I think that that's something that, Quinn Snyder said, hey, look, sure, we can have Donovan Mitchell give us 50 points every game, but we have to be a little bit more, even-keeled as a team putting up points. And then here's the killer. The Jazz had 48 points in the paint in both of these games, and that touches back to those comments about Jokic not really being that great of a defensive player.
Well, not to mention that Rudy Gobert shoots like 71% in the paint as well. So they're an extremely efficient team down there, and couple that with not so tough defense. That's
shooting might be a too nice of a term there, but I see what you mean.
Well, yeah. But I mean, he's a giant, and he gets the ball in close there, and he doesn't hardly miss. I think he's second in the NBA in field goal percentage, just all around. So
yeah, for a career, absolutely, he's up there.
Obviously, Utah's efficient on both sides of the ball, whereas Denver is more of a volume scoring team, I feel like, and they give up a lot of points, and they let their opponent shoot the ball really well. If they want to make a comeback in this series, they're going to have to play better defense. They're going to have to figure out a way to get some stops, and they're going to have to figure out who their go-to guy is. If it is Michael Porter Jr., great, but they need to go there.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree, and we can move on from that one. I mean, this series, it could swing back the other way. We could see Mike Malone come in and make some changes, but if he gets booted in the first round, I think that he's on the hot seat. Not saying that he does get removed from this position, but he very well could be hearing some noise about it.
Right, and moving on, and speaking of coaches that are on the hot seat or should probably be on their way out.
Excellent segue.
Next up, we've got Boston and Philadelphia. And Boston, as we said earlier, won today and advanced to the next round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. They swept the 76ers. And in my opinion, Philadelphia's team this year has to be one of, if not the most disappointing teams of the last decade. They have so much talent on that team. Their salary is so high. They've paid like 4 guys are going to be on max contracts, basically. Yep. They've got Embiid and Simmons, who we've talked about them not fitting together, perfectly on the court. But you've got to think a good coach could come in and figure out a system to make just about anything work with two guys that are that talented.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And the 3 games that we didn't cover from the last time we recorded, the Celtics won all 3, obviously, for a clean sweep, 128-101, 102-94, which after that loss really kind of said, okay, Philly, their hearts ripped out of their chest, and they're going to lose the next game, which they did. They lost 110-106 in a game that was not as close as the score would indicate. A buddy of mine, Logan Newman, put on Twitter today that he said, this is the biggest blowout for a 4-point ball game that I've ever seen. It drug out so long. There was a lot of, there was writing on the wall, and maybe there's a little bit of, symbolism in some of the things, right? Like when there was about 6 minutes left of the fourth quarter, Joel Embiid just got his 5th foul, and Al Horford popped up off the bench because Brett Brown said that he was pulling him in, and Embiid waved off Brett Brown and said no. And so, that moment could encapsulate the entire season for Philadelphia, where Joel Embiid gets a lot of hate and a lot of criticism for his heart and effort and things like that. I think that needs to stop, because you've seen in this situation where obviously the roster hasn't been a good fit all season long. I had concerns about that right off the jump, and losing Ben Simmons, who everyone wants to criticize, that needs to stop. This series is a perfect example of why he's important to any team that he's on. Embiid waving off Brett Brown, to me, almost seems like it was Dame Lillard waving off OKC last season in the playoffs, Austin.
Yeah, it kind of seemed like he was saying, you can go. We're done with you now. One of your buddies, I think Jeff, just posted on a video, Sixers plan failed. I agree and disagree with that. That's actually something I wanted to touch on, so we'll go ahead and talk about it right now.
All right.
I think getting two, all NBA level first team talents in a 5-year span, I don't think you can say that it failed. I think the organization has done everything they could to mess up the immense amount of talent that they do have. They didn't build the roster right around them. They totally botched the Markelle Fultz pick. They've made mistake after mistake. They brought in the Colangelo, and they had that, that big scandal with his wife or whatever it was. And, that just, it was a bad look for the organization. Elton Brand has not done a great job of building the roster around this team, like in a league that's getting smaller and smaller and spreading the court more and more. They bring in guys that all kind of play in the same area, and they try to go to this super big lineup, which the Lakers do a little bit too, but it works a little bit better when two of
the best player in the world.
Yeah, when two of those big guys are, guys that can step out away from the basket and shoot a little bit. And Simmons hasn't even tried to develop a three. And I'm sorry, I know they're, NBA superstars and they're grown men, and it's easier said than done. But if you're the head coach of that team, wouldn't you be on him every day to work on his shooting?
Well, and that's the thing. Like, you always hear about how in practice he puts up these shots, and Brett Brown has said, hey, yeah, the plan is to get him more involved, in the offense as far as shooting. And Jeff just came back and agreed. The executives are there. I think it's really hard to put a pulse, put your finger on the pulse of why this failed, because you have the players all throughout the season had come out and said that chemistry was an issue. They always talked about chemistry. Does Embiid do Ben Simmons and Joel Embiid like each other? Does Al Horford get along on this team? And when you're hearing that in the second or third month of the NBA season, you're in trouble, right? And Brett Brown was one of my top 3 most disappointing coaches that I did on an episode of Breaking the Game back when it was just me earlier in the year. And it was exactly for this reason, is that there are NBA coaches or potential NBA coaches who would love to have a chance to mess this up the way that Brett Brown did, right? And Markelle Fultz, for whatever reason, decided that he wanted to play better in Orlando than in Philadelphia. I don't think that he was ready for the pressure of being in a big market like Philadelphia, playing alongside 2 other guys who basically the same skill set, right? Like, they're both interior finishers. Fultz's shot just went away. So, he kind of parallels what you were seeing with Ben Simmons, with the non-shooting shot creator for other people, right? It was just really difficult to watch that for the season. But going back to these games, Embiid put up big numbers. He had 34 and 10 in game 2, 30 and 13 in game 3, and I think he had another 20 and 10 performance tonight. He was dog tired. He played the majority of the game and didn't have any consistent help. No other Sixer player before today recorded more than 18 points. That tells you a lot of how this team is just not a good fit. Horford himself had 4 and 6 points in the 2 games before today. I can't remember exactly how many points he finished with today, but he wasn't the Al Horford that everyone thought he was going to be, coming into the year. The Sixers committed more turnovers in game 2 and 3 and had field goal percentages of 41 and 29%. That's not a winning formula. And going back to that game 3 performance that Jason Tatum had, where he was only 15 points on 31% from the field, and Philadelphia couldn't capitalize on that game. When that game was done, Joel Embiid said some stuff that you can kind of read into and say, okay, like, things are going to change this offseason, and I don't think that's a secret for anybody.
Right. If you want to, and a look behind the curtain into what's going on in the locker room in Philadelphia, Joel Embiid's probably the best source to get that from. He's always going to speak his mind. He wears his heart on his sleeve. What he's thinking pretty much all the time. So I think it's safe to say that there's changes that are going to be made. And, I've heard a lot on, social media and a lot on the internet that teams are readying these packages in case they decide to shop one of those 2 guys, Embiid or Simmons. And I don't think there's a chance of that happening yet. I think you've got to give, at least one more coach a try with that.
I agree.
And one other thing I wanted to mention a little bit is what you said about Markelle Fultz coming in and not being ready for that much pressure playing with all these guys. This is a team that was a incredible shot away from the Eastern Conference Finals last year. Like, they were
Absolutely
a much better team last year. They've regressed in a lot of areas, and that's not Joel Embiid's fault. Like you said, he's been incredible, and there's really nothing you can say about his play in this series. I think he had 30 again today, almost, if not almost.
I'm pretty sure he finished within the 20s. I'm not 100%. Yeah.
Well, regardless, he probably averaged about 30 for the whole series, and
right.
He was the best player. Him or Tatum were the best player on the court, and it didn't really make much of a difference. But another thing with Brett Brown too, Al Horford was a legitimate superstar with the Boston Celtics. He was their best player for a lot of those playoff games that he was on that team, and he was basically a non-factor for a lot of big portions of the season as well as the playoffs for this 76ers team. And Tobias Harris was a much different player with Orlando, and when he was with the Clippers for a little while.
Yeah, and the Pistons too. Yeah.
And he came in here, and he's regressed as well. And it just seems like they brought in all these really talented guys, and it's not easy to win with talent. You have to be able to. You still have to be a good coach. It's hard to massage the egos of 4 superstars or 4 guys on max contracts like that. But I think there's got to be somebody that could get at least an Eastern Conference Finals or NBA Finals appearance out of this roster at the very least. I think Philadelphia should be competing for the championship with a roster like this, especially if, like everybody says, if the Eastern Conference is the weaker conference, which I don't necessarily agree with completely. I mean, I think obviously the West is deeper.
Yeah, top to bottom, the West is stronger, but the top half of the East is just as strong as the top half.
Loaded. And but the 76ers should be right up there, and they're just not.
At least 4th, at least.
At the very least. I think the amount of talent they have, it should be them and Boston, really. I mean, I think if Nick Nurse was their coach, they would be the number 1 seed going away.
It would be hard. It would be hard to imagine that. But instead of spending the entire series recap just dogging the Philadelphia 76ers, let's give the Celtics a little bit of love here.
Right.
So Tatum had a good game too. He had 33, 5, and 5. We mentioned his struggles in Game 3. He was phenomenal today. I get googly eyes every time I watch Jason Tatum play basketball. He has slowly become like one of my favorite, if not my favorite players in the NBA this year. You had, Kemba and Brown had 20 points or more in Game 2 and Game 3. Obviously, Walker had another big game today. Brown had a slightly less dominant game. I think he finished with 16 or 18 today. Boston shot better in most aspects of, all the games. I think there was one game where Philadelphia actually shot a better free throw percentage than Boston, which was surprising. And then between the 2 games combined, Boston had 7 more assists and 3 more turnovers. So a little bit of, assist to turnover ratio going in favor of Boston there. And, I thought that losing Hayward would be a bigger story, and probably if it's not for this series, it will certainly be a story that you're going to hear about if the Raptors, and they should advance, right? We talked all about Philadelphia just being a complete waste, but Boston, I thought, closed out this series well with another big game from Tatum and Kemba. And for the first sweep of the playoffs occurring, I did not expect it to be this game. I thought that it would be coming from a different matchup. And one thing, too, I just want to tell, Kemba Walker, if somehow this gets back to you, congratulations on your first ever playoff series victory. That's taken way too long for someone as talented as Kemba Walker.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. He definitely deserves, good things to happen to him. He's an extremely good player. He plays really hard. I do like his game. And I hate to say it, I will admit it, Jason Tatum's starting to turn me into a fan as well. How can you not like him? I mean, he just, what doesn't he do well? And, I know it's been talked about a lot in the past, but I think it shows that he's worked out with Kobe Bryant. You see the attention to detail in his game. Like Kobe always talked about, you have to have a counter move for a move.
And the patience to execute it.
Right. And he never gets rattled. He seems like he hits even in game 3 when he wasn't playing well. He hit a big shot down the stretch, and like you said, that game right there that broke their back. They weren't going to win today, I don't think.
No,
I didn't think they had much of a chance to win today after that happened. And
you had Tobias Harris have that scary fall, and thank goodness he was able. I don't know how. I don't care. I don't want to see any or hear any of the medical reports coming back. He fell hard. Blood poured out of his head, and he came back, with tape over his eye, and somehow he was not concussed. It was just cool to see him come back and play in that game.
Yeah, and I've not playing basketball, but about a year ago at work, I had a similar thing happen to me where I completely busted my eyebrow open, and it's more scary than anything, but it blew me away that he was back out there as quick as he was.
Absolutely.
So props to him on not giving up. Obviously, I don't feel like the Sixers gave up. They played hard. They are professionals.
Yep.
That being said, they were just overmatched, more so with Embiid being out, Simmons being out. Boston, like you and I both picked them to go to the NBA Finals, and for good reason. Even without Gordon Hayward, they're still extremely deep. They have some of the best perimeter defenders in the NBA.
Exactly.
And my only worry on this team was that they were undersized, and I think they, put all those worries to bed pretty quickly in this series. But they've got 2 terrific, well, 3 really with Brown, offensive talents that can give you 25 to 30 points any night. And not a whole lot of teams have 3 guys like that. There's a lot of teams that have 2. The Clippers have maybe 3, but the Lakers only have 2. Milwaukee might have 2.
Dallas has 2.
But Boston's deep.
Houston has 2.
They're experienced. They're not an old team. They're relatively on the younger side, but they have a good mix. Kemba Walker's been around a while. Marcus Smart's been there for quite a few years, and it seems like Jason Tatum's been in the NBA forever. He looks like a veteran out there for sure. I think, not to hammer too much at this point, but the difference in coaching again is glaring.
Yes.
Boston just seems ready for anything that Philadelphia had to throw at them. And it'll be exciting to see the Celtics and the Raptors in the next round. That's going to be a really awesome matchup.
I agree. And before we close, I just want to say that today was, the late, great Kobe Bryant's birthday. So, prayers to his family. I know that, it's got to be hard, the first birthday afterward. And it was very cool to see Tatum, who you mentioned was trained by Kobe Bryant, for one, him to do it, and 2, his team to allow him to wear, purple, Laker purple on his arm, that sweatband. It was pretty cool that, as heated as that Lakers-Celtics rivalry is, that you saw Celtic rocking, a purple armband where Kobe wore it in honor of him. So it was very cool to see.
Yeah, some things are just bigger than basketball, and I think that's obviously that this is one of them. And, that kind of respect and, mutual respect between players is kind of what makes it a little bit easier to stomach liking a Celtic as much as I'm starting to. But,
right.
I think I can get over it. It's not his fault. That's where he plays.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And it's not his fault that he's as good as he is. Maybe it is a little bit. But we can go ahead and talk about the next matchup where actually there is a game going on right now. I don't see a score behind me, so as much as I would love to update the listeners here, but right now the Los Angeles Clippers are up against the Dallas Mavericks. The Clippers lead 2-1. In today's game, Kristaps Porzingis, I saw him warming up. It was very weird to see him be out for today's game with what's being labeled as knee soreness. And, a poor time for something like this to happen to one of the high-scoring players in the NBA. He was awarded, all-bubble second team, although I didn't agree with that take. He's a fine player, but, the Dallas Mavericks are without their second-best player. The last 2 games that have been covered, the Clippers lost 127-114, and then on the 21st, they won 130-122. Austin, what's your take on the way that this series has gone so far?
Well, it's been an interesting series to watch in the aspect of I kind of felt like the Dallas Mavericks were a little bit soft, or at least that's their reputation around the league. You know, they've got two stars that aren't your typical run-of-the-mill NBA stars. They smile for the cameras a lot. They seem like very nice, approachable guys.
Yeah, I call them the happy Mavs, right? Like they're just they're a European team, like from top to bottom.
And Luka Doncic is very much a 20-year-old kid. You know, he seems his age, but at the same time, they've shown that they've had a lot of adversity in this series. There's been a lot of physical play. You know, like you said, it's been a very chippy series, and they haven't backed down. So that's a good thing to see. You know, obviously, Luka Doncic is you know, he knows how good he is. He's flashy like that for a reason, because he knows he's good. And, you know, that it translates to, you know, the way his team has shown, you know, their backbone a little bit in this series. Paul George, you know, kind of the same old story with him. Has good games, but it's a good thing that he's not the guy that they're relying on, the Clippers, to be their star, because he, you know, 14 and 11, he's kind of disappeared again. And I think it was Damian Lillard said it back best when they were having that beef. You know, Paul George's best shot came in a commercial. And
no one should ever mess with Damian Lillard in an exchange of words, ever.
But, you know, and Paul George especially, you know, remember a couple of years ago when he tried to call himself Playoff P, and he just, you know, completely crapped the bed in that series, and he's kind of doing it again. He has, you know, rebounded the ball well. He has gotten, you know, a good number of assists. But luckily for the Clippers, Kawhi Leonard is playing like the best player in the world in my eyes, like he was last year. You know, he's showing you again why you can never count out a team that's led by him in the playoffs.
And it seems like he's just doing it quietly. You know what I mean? It just doesn't seem like he's like overly asserting himself.
Right. Well, you know, he is a fun guy, but you know, he doesn't say much. So, you know, that's a big part of it. You don't hear him talking a lot in the media. You don't, you know, he just goes about his business. He just wants to win. And he's extremely physical. He's stronger than just about anybody in the NBA, I would guess, just by watching him play. And, you know, he's asserted himself big time in these last two games. You know, Luka Doncic has played really well on the other side. And I think that's a big part of why you haven't heard as much about Kawhi's numbers, because Luka's putting up, you know, oh, he just broke another record for the youngest player to do this or the youngest player to do that.
Yeah, starting to get some LeBron love.
Right. You know, he's the sexy headline, whereas Kawhi's been doing this for quite a few years now, and we just watched him do it all last year, and I think people kind of expect it from him.
Yeah, and he's just a Terminator. He doesn't smile. He doesn't frown. He doesn't flex. Like, he goes out and does his thing. And you talked about how Luka's had some big games. He had 38 in Game 2. And then what I like to call a low triple-double in Game 3. He only scored 13 points but finished with double figures in rebounds and assists. You know, he actually had an ankle injury sustained in that game. He was actually labeled as questionable today. I couldn't imagine, you know, him finding out that Porzingis was actually suffering from knee problems and needed to sit out, that he would have felt right missing this game also. That would have basically been a death sentence to the series for the Dallas Mavericks. So, you know, I mentioned that this is a chippy series. I mentioned that, you know, the happy Dallas Mavericks are trying to show that they're capable of being aggressive and they won't back down. You know, I think the way that the NBA has handled, you know, that Luka and Montrezl Harrell double technical where, you know, exchange of words and what's perceived as racism, you know, and if it's perceived by some to be racism, then therefore it must absolutely be racist. You know, it was great to see before the game Montrez approach Luka Doncic, you know, with the contrition and you know, apologetic nature, and Luka just to say, hey man, it's water under the bridge, you know, it's a heated game of basketball. And, you know, they moved on from there. And it's great to see with, you know, the racial tensions that we have in our society now, for something that could have very much so went sideways for two players to come together and be like, you know what, man, like it's cool. You know, we don't have to beat each other up over this anymore. Right. So I thought that was very interesting to see, Austin.
Right. I agree. You know, I think a little overblown, just in the aspect that, like you said, in the heat of the game, in the heat of battle, things get said. And, you know, I don't think Luka Doncic was he didn't seem, overly offended by it, but it almost seems like the media around it were the ones that made a bigger deal out of it. But that doesn't mean it was right. And
Correct. That's the key.
Right. And you can try all you want to keep politics out of sports, but at the end of the day, athletes are people too. And, their voice matters as much as anybody else's, if not more, in some aspects. And it was nice to see them able to move past that. And like you said, we can't determine what is offensive to someone else. So the NBA kind of backed themselves into a corner with this, putting Black Lives Matter on the court, and they kind of have to address it more than probably they would like to, and make it a little bit more of a story than it really was. Because if they just let it go and didn't say anything about it, or acted like it wasn't, something that could be offensive, and that looks, it's a double standard, hypocrisy, whatever you want to call it. But it was good for everybody involved that they just squashed it, got it over with.
Yeah, and there has been no level of discipline given to Montrezl Harrell other than a talking to from Doc Rivers, who's respected in the world of sports and outside the world of sports, to say, hey, look, man, like, this is not cool. They addressed it, they squashed it, move on. We can move on from that conversation as well, Austin. And just want to mention a couple other key factors over the past couple of games that have been played since we last recorded. Kristaps Porzingis, we mentioned how he and Luka Doncic have to figure out how to play together on the court. KP had 23 and 34 in games 2 and 3, which was a big help for the Mavericks, at least in game 3, when Luka Doncic wasn't really playing at his best overall offensively, which we know that if Luka's at his best, he's one of the best to ever do it, right? They still lost in that game, though. Some key things that I wanted to focus in on that I thought were interesting. Both teams had the exact number of fouls against them in each game. But when you watch the games played, it felt like the Clippers were getting more of the fouls that, were more significant, right? Between both of the games 2 and 3 combined, the Clippers had a combined 5 more free throw attempts in each of the games put together, right? So it seems like the number of fouls, yes, were close, but the ones that matter more, you saw the Clippers get the little bit more of that, that championship roster benefit of the doubt almost, whereas the Mavericks, are a good story and they're playing very well. They just don't have those savvy veterans like the Clippers do.
Right, and it could be a little bit of the championship, bump or whatever you want to call it, and get those calls. But it could also be too, veteran savvy and knowing how to draw a foul on a shot attempt a little bit better. Versus, Dallas could be getting a lot of fouls called on the Clippers on loose balls or on rebounds. Whereas, obviously the Clippers, when they attack the rim as much as they do and they're as aggressive as they are, a lot of those are probably shooting fouls.
Right.
And, that's a lot of that, like you said, has to do with, veterans that have been there before, that have pretty much seen it all. This series could still swing kind of either way. I do think that the Clippers are going to end up winning this series. And you wanted to update everybody. It's a 4-point game right now in the third quarter, so it is a really good game. The Clippers are up. So, tune into that one. It kind of starting to feel like game 1 a little bit, where, if Porzingis was out there the whole game, does Dallas win? If Porzingis is out there today, would they have the lead right now? It kind of changes things a lot when, like we talked about, they only have 2 guys that can go out there and really light it up for you like that. And, one of them being out, it's a huge blow to them. But they're still playing hard. They're right in the game. It's anybody's game still. So it's been a great series. It's been exciting, and more back and forth than I thought it would be, for sure.
Absolutely, and just a key note so far, the losing team has had more turnovers than their loss, so that's like a very old school coach's, speech. If whoever turns the ball over more is gonna lose the game. That's not always the case, but in this series, it's been pretty interesting to see that. And the only thing else I want to say, Austin, before we move on, is that although Luka is playing today and he's playing well, that the injury still kind of worries me a little bit, because I feel like, one, with KP out, he's going to try even harder. and we all know that if your ankle is feeling tender, it doesn't take much for it to roll the wrong way again. And it just worries me. So just keep an eye on that. I don't want Luka to get hurt, but that's something to be concerned about.
Definitely, yeah. I agree. He is the type of player that's never going to back down, and he's not going to take it easy when he's out there, especially in his first playoff series. I think something that's not talked about as much about him because he is a European player, and he doesn't, something gets lost in translation, even though he does speak English really well.
Yes, better than me.
Right, but what I'm saying is he is probably out there to prove himself more than you and I even realize. He's probably, every minute he's out there on the court, he's thinking to himself, well, I've got to show these guys that I'm just as good as all these American players, and all these guys that, I'm young, they've been established. I'm trying to prove myself and get to where they are. And he's, never going to back down. And that's a lot of times where you have to hope that the team can kind of save the player from himself if they need to. And sit him down if it does get worse, because he is the future of the Mavs and one of the future faces of the NBA, I believe. So definitely don't want it to get worse.
Yeah, but I also at the same time don't want to see a Zion Williamson situation where Carlisle has to play him X amount of minutes a game and then figure out rotations from there.
Right.
But do you have any further thoughts about the Maverick series?
No, I'm pretty excited to get onto this Pacers and Heat series.
Well, why don't you bring it on, because I know that you have a dog in this fight.
Yeah, I am from Indianapolis, so I'm local to the Pacers. I have grown more of a fan of theirs over time, but I do have a pretty good sense of what's going on around the team and the city and the feel. And one thing I can say about this series, Miami is up 3-0. They won the last two games 109-100 and 124-115. They've had 5 different players score 20 or more in these two games. The Heat have Butler, Bam Adebayo, Goran Dragic, Tyler Hero, and Duncan Robinson. Jay Crowder was in double figures in both games. TJ Warren kind of came back down to earth. Oladipo has done better. He's still not the Oladipo that was, setting the world on fire 2 years ago before his injury.
Right.
And that's to be expected. It takes time. But even if he was playing as good as he was then, and I hate to say it, even if Sabonis was healthy and everybody was there, even with Jeremy Lamb, I just think there's some kind of mental block with the Pacers and the Heat. And the Pacers match up with them well. They play hard. They shoot the ball almost equally as well. They rebound equally as well. They're not a bad defensive team. They just, down the stretch, Miami makes the plays to win the game, and Indiana never does. And it's been like that since LeBron James first came to Miami. It's been like that forever.
Yeah, you can see that in a lot of aspects, right? Like the Heat have shot well from outside in both of the games that have happened since we last recorded, 51% and 39% from downtown. They've actually out-rebounded the Pacers in both of these games. The Pacers, to their credit, have scored more points in the paint, but have actually committed significantly more fouls between these last two games combined. It's a huge disparity. There's a great divide, a chasm, if you will, between the 54 fouls caught on the Pacers and Miami's 34.
Mm-hmm. And I think, again, that's if you actually watch the games, you see the Pacers, their offense is, they run a lot of sets. They get a lot of, in the mid-range. They don't really have a guy that attacks the rim other than Oladipo, and he's not the same Oladipo as he was. And they are a good three-point shooting team. I don't think they shoot enough threes. I think they should shoot more threes. But Miami's extremely aggressive. Jimmy Butler's a downhill player. They do have a lot of shooters, obviously, like Duncan Robinson and Tyler Hero. But, Bam Adebayo can get to the rim. He can play outside as well. They're very versatile, and they have a little bit more of an attacking style. I just think the Pacers, I don't know where they go from here if they get swept. I don't know what they should do to upgrade their roster, because I think from last year to this year, they upgraded their roster significantly. And obviously, things might be different with Sabonis. He was, one of the only 3 or 4 players averaging like 20 and 12 or 20 and 13 or something this year. And so he was terrific, but plantar fasciitis is a hard injury to deal with, and it's something that can bother a player for years sometimes. It can kind of go away and then come back, and when you have no warning when it does. And it's big guys with feet problems always kind of worry me.
Especially when they're not uber athletic to begin with.
Right. And Miles Turner is another interesting subject. I know a lot of fans are fed up with him and think they should trade him. I love
Miles Turner.
I don't know who for. I mean, he's a stretch big man that protects the rim. He's not a physical, get in the post and bang with you type of center, but that's not the way the NBA is anymore. And so I can't see how or where they really have a glaring weakness that they need to upgrade the roster. They don't have the top tier guy like you need to really win a championship.
Right.
They're gonna play really hard. They're gonna run their sets. They're gonna be in the right places. They're good enough to be in the middle to top half of the East every year, but you see it time and again come playoff time. They're missing that it factor to get to the next level, and Miami just has that. And Miami, Jimmy Butler might be the difference. It might be just how deep they are. I think they've obviously got a great coach in Miami, and I think McMillan is a pretty good coach with the Pacers too. So what are your thoughts on all of that?
I think that just sometimes you run into a team that has your number. And Indiana is a great team. They've been a great surprise to a lot of people. I thought that they were going to do well from the get-go. I think the additions that they got with Malcolm Brogdon was really high on him. Bringing in a guy like Jeremy Lamb and T.J. Warren. I didn't know that T.J. Warren was going to be as great. I didn't know that Warren was going to be as great as he was. But I thought that he was certainly going to be a better player than what you get for cash considerations, right?
At the very least, you're getting an 18-point-a-game scorer. You're getting somebody that can make a basket or two.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want to say, hey, D, thank you for stopping by. It's nice to see you. But it's just Miami. Indiana really isn't doing anything wrong. Like, that's the thing. It's like Indiana is playing a good game for the players they have. They're down an all-star. Brogdon's been in and out. We don't even really know how close to 100% Victor Oladipo is right now because he's been dinged up in the bubble already. There was concerns about whether or not he was going to play, and then $2 million was a lot of money for him. To give up on. So he was basically kind of strong-armed into being in this series, and he just doesn't seem like he's right. Meanwhile, Miami, on the other hand, is just a scary team for anybody. This is not the ideal matchup for the Milwaukee Bucks. I still think that Miami is going to advance past Milwaukee, if everything goes well for Milwaukee, which it should, right? They're just a tough team to beat, man. When they're hitting from outside, they're even tougher. But even if they're not hitting from outside, they still can hurt you in a number of different ways. And you're seeing that against the Pacers.
Right. And to get a little bit into that Milwaukee series coming up, potentially, most likely, I think, like you said, the Heat are pretty uniquely built to play Milwaukee very tough. They could give them a lot of problems because Milwaukee relies obviously on Giannis, but outside of him, they rely heavily on three-point shooting. And I think Bam Adebayo was the perfect defender to at least slow down Giannis enough to where you have to rely on that three-point shooting even more. And all it takes is a couple games here and there of a team not shooting well, and the underdog team wins a game or two that they didn't think they should, and they get a little bit of momentum, and next thing you know, you have an upset. And it could happen. I've seen crazier things happen in the playoffs before. Obviously, Miami has what you hear all the time. They talk about Heat culture. They've got, a championship pedigree with the coach and the GM and all throughout that organization. And I think it's really showing. They're a veteran team. They're very experienced. They still have young guys that are contributing quite a bit as well. It's another team that has a good mix of that veteran savvy with, they got a nice influx of young talent this year with Hero and Kendrick Nunn. You've got to think that they had the best, looking back, they had the best draft as far as both rounds of any team.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. Lisa, I appreciate your take here on Milwaukee winning it. From everything that I've seen, up until the bubble, Miami was undefeated against Milwaukee in the regular season. And then even when Milwaukee did beat Miami, it took a valiant effort on their end, right? So there was a lot to be worried about if you're Milwaukee going up against the Miami. And speaking of Milwaukee and speaking of upsets, Milwaukee is fresh off of 2 games after being upset by the Orlando Magic. Austin, how has the game shook out since then?
Well, how's that for a transition? That was beautiful.
Oh, thank you, man. I try.
Well, you said it best when you talked about it after game 1. Orlando does a good job of waking up a juggernaut, sleeping giant, if you will. The Bucks showed why they were the number 1 team in the East all year. I said after game 1 that the others had to give them more than 12 points, and they really backed me up there. They made me look good. Bucks had four guys over double figures in game 2 and 3, or game 2 and 3 in game 3. Sorry, they've got to get more out of Chris Middleton, but
absolutely.
But it does bode well that they've looked as good as they have the last 2 games with him still not playing well. Giannis is obviously going to get his. I almost think that we're in a situation now where it's like what the Warriors did with James Harden a couple of years ago. Let him get his 30, just make sure he doesn't get 50, and make the other guys beat you a little bit. And they're going to need Middleton to really step up against Miami. They're not gonna beat them with him scoring under 10 points per game. But the Lopez twins, picked it up again. Brooke Lopez has played much better. Pat Connaughton had a couple really big games. Dante DiVincenzo has looked really good again. So, all those guys that were worried about a little bit after game 1, they steadied the ship big time. And it's been an exciting couple of games if you're a Milwaukee fan. They've outshot the Orlando Magic by a significant percentage the last 2 games. They've out-rebounded them, by 24 total rebounds over these 2 games. And really, honestly, that's just, who wants it more. That's the Bucks, I think, got a little bit angry after game 1. Like you said, back to it, they woke them up, and, they're playing a lot better than they were.
Yeah, and my buddy Allen just came in to give some more Heat love. I think he missed when we were just lavishing on top of how we think Miami is the team, one of the teams to beat in the East. I have them facing the Celtics in the Eastern Conference. Adebayo is an incredible defender for Giannis, and not to mention Jimmy can give you minutes there. And then you have a couple of guys like Andre Iguodala who can hem up Chris Middleton a little bit too. So yeah, the Bucks, they're beating the team right now that they're supposed to be beating. It just seems like the Magic for the second year in a row awoken a contending giant from their slumber, if you will. The Bucks have committed a lot of fouls in these games though, because if you look at the way the games are played, they committed 26 and 20 fouls in these games. And they're doing it against the 8 seed without a starter and Aaron Gordon. I don't think that gets talked about enough. This is something that they can't do against the Miami Heat if they're going to contend for a title, because Jimmy Butler is going to put them in all kinds of situations to where, he's going to get fouls and he's going to get to the line, and it's got to be something that Milwaukee has a game plan around.
Right. He's a very aggressive player on offense. He's going to attack the rim. He's going to try to draw fouls. I actually think the number of fouls is a little misleading. I think if they're good fouls, I think it's a good thing that Milwaukee is playing a little bit more physical on defense. They're going to need that against Miami. Now, if they're getting a lot of those fouls because they're just out of position or reaching or getting beat off the dribble, that's a little different. But if they're, playing more physical on the inside, which they already are an extremely good defensive interior team, stay home on the shooters a little bit better, they could still, obviously, they're the number one team for a reason. They're still extremely talented. They're still really good. I believe in the guys other than Jimmy Butler in Miami more than I believe in the guys other than Giannis in Milwaukee. I think they have more guys that can do more things well. Milwaukee has a lot of good pieces around Giannis, but I know he was an all-star this year, but is Chris Middleton really a Batman? Or I mean, a Robin to Giannis's Batman.
Yeah, and you're not seeing it so far. Maybe today he'll silence us a little bit and put up, a 22, 24-point game. But right now we're not seeing it, and that's concerning if you're Milwaukee when you're going up against a buzzsaw that is the Miami Heat. Do you have anything else that you want to talk about on this series, Austin?
No, I just kind of want to reiterate that it is. I was like you. I was somebody that thought Milwaukee would just light it up in this series and not have any real trouble. And so you got to give credit to Orlando. They're a well-coached team. They play really hard. I just think they're outgunned, obviously, in this series. But you got to give them credit for playing hard.
Yeah, and Steve Clifford is not going to coach a team that's just going to give right. No effort. They were blown out in a couple, at least one of these games. It was really, really ugly. But, I mean, you're without Aaron Gordon, and you don't have – and that's the thing. The Magic don't have a go-to guy. Like, Vucevic is a nice center, but he's not what you need when you have a go-to scorer. And Miami has a couple of those guys, not to mention just some absolute killers from downtown. But we can transition from here to the Oklahoma City Thunder actually getting a game up, yesterday on the 22nd on the Houston Rockets. What have your thoughts been on the series so far, Austin?
This is the series that I think you and I both thought was going to be a lot closer than maybe it has. Mm-hmm. I actually had Oklahoma City winning this series in 7 games. I feel now that was, a little bit too high on them maybe. Houston took some really big punches from Oklahoma City in game 2 and still came out on top.
Yes.
Schroeder and Gilgeous-Alexander both played a lot better, and they still couldn't get over the hump. It took a heroic performance from Chris Paul to win game 3, and they had to go to overtime to do it.
Yep.
And, we still haven't really seen Houston shoot the ball all that well other than game 1. Game 1, they shot the ball pretty well, but they won and lost shooting about 41% from the field in both games, and that's a little low for an overall percentage. Now, that's going to be a little lower because they shoot, more threes than twos a lot of games or
correct
to it. But, I'll take the math on that if you're about the same percentage. So, and OKC had 4 different players with 20 or more points in the win. Schroeder, CP3, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and Danilo Gallinari it took all 4 of them having big games to eke out a overtime win. And I mean, they did take off in overtime and win.
Yeah, once it hit overtime, it was decided.
It was a pretty close game up to that point. And I just think, Houston is starting to look more and more like a scary opponent for anybody, kind of like Miami. The way they move the ball, Eric Gordon and Jeff Green have really stepped up, and they've been able to keep up that level of play, which I didn't really expect. And they're going to get Russell Westbrook back at some point, as long as they don't get knocked out before that. And and they do, they're going to be a really hard team to knock out.
Absolutely agree. And if you look at the game 2 performance you mentioned earlier, Harden had a rough game. He put up 21 points, right? So if you're looking at counting stats, like, yeah, okay, that's not as high as his 30-point average, but it's still good. But he only did it on 31% shooting from the field, right? But then he returned it with a big game 3, ultimately resulting in a loss with 38, 8, and 7. So that's something that you need to consider when you're looking at Harden, right? Because if the Rockets in their victory they had out of the 2 games that we're discussing, they had 7 players that were in double figures in that victory, but only 4 in their loss. So how much of that is Harden maybe doing too much? I don't tend to think that he can never do too much with the roster that he has right now. Like, he has to be the guy, right? So it's still a tough series for me to read, Austin, because ultimately getting 2-0 up on the Thunder puts the Thunder in a bad spot. But Donovan has done a great job coaching. I still think that it's more Chris Paul's team, right, than it is Donovan's, and that's something that you have to kind of consider. His coaching with top tier talent really didn't result in a whole heck of a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And now he's got more of a well-rounded roster than he's probably ever has. But he has one of the best point guards in the entire NBA, maybe one of the best to ever do it in Chris Paul. And fifth seed in the Western Conference was not like out of the picture in my mind if Chris Paul were to stay and be invested. You still have Danilo Gallinari, who in the Eastern Conference would probably be a 2 or 3 time All-Star at least. Steven Adams is a tremendous center. SGA is an up-and-coming guard, and then Schroeder has turned into one of the 6 men of the year candidates, right? So I don't know how much of that necessarily goes to Billy Donovan. I know that you're a lot higher on him than I am. He did great in college, but that doesn't always necessarily pan out in the pros.
Usually it's a hard transition to go from college to the pros for a lot of guys, and I think he had it especially hard going to an Oklahoma City team that had Durant and Westbrook when he got there, and having to take over a team that had 2 absolute superstars and try to make it your team. So to that extent, I think it is probably a little bit easier for him to coach a team that's a little bit more well-rounded, as you said. And to your point about Chris Paul, actually a few months back, I was working on a project that I decided to do what if on that Lakers Chris Paul trade that got vetoed.
Oh, yes.
And just going through the analytics and how much Chris Paul positively affects the team he's on is insane. He's got there's a really high level analytic that's pretty new called player impact plus minus. And it even accounts for luck and and it does future projection as well. But Chris Paul has 9 of the 10 best seasons all time by that statistic. And Magic Johnson has the other one. And so that just shows you he was in that year that I was looking at, he was added 18.6 wins above replacement to his team, which is insane. And so you're right to an extent there about that. But Donovan did make some good adjustments. They put Lou Dort on Harden, and he really dogged him, and it looked like a really good move. So going forward, that's definitely a storyline to watch. What you said about it, is it Harden doing too much? I think anybody else in the league, you ask that question with the performances like he's had, you'd probably say yes. But Houston has completely built this team around the idea that Harden is going to do it all. So,
right.
Anything that he doesn't have to do, anybody else that can pick up a little bit of the slack for him, I think is just bonus points for them. And getting Harden or getting Westbrook back is really going to make a huge difference there. But I just think, I disagree with you a little bit about this series being back and forth. I think we saw Oklahoma City's best performance. I think that's about as good as they're going to get. And, Harden did have a good game and they still lost, but Houston didn't play their best. And it's, like I said, it still took 4 20-point scorers and overtime to win that game for Oklahoma City. So I think they're done. In my eyes, I could see them taking it to 6 games, but I don't think they're going to upset the Houston Rockets. I did originally, but these 3 games have definitely changed my stance on that.
Yeah, I would like to see what the number is of the times that Oklahoma City this season had 4 20-point scorers on the same night. That would be something interesting to go back and take a look on. But
maybe
I think
that's something they do all the time, but that's we haven't seen it a lot, at least from many other teams in these playoffs.
Exactly, and I just find it odd that you're giving your NBA Coach of the Year the kiss of death already. You're not going to give him a chance to make some adjustments and maybe take advantage of the series, or?
Well, like I said, he's made some good moves, so it remains to be seen. But I do have a history of whoever I pick tends to lose, so I'm kind of going reverse psychology here.
Trying to psych yourself into winning.
Maybe if I pick Houston, they'll come out and miss 28 threes in a row again or whatever they did. But I already am the kiss of death, so I'm trying to take it back the other way.
Yeah, and Alan brings up a point that I've been hearing a lot is that the Rockets will always struggle in the playoffs when Harden is the number one option. I don't know how many times lately I've said it, but I'll keep repeating it. I am not a James Harden fan. I cannot stand the way that historically he has played games. I've never liked the Houston Rockets with James Harden on there. Something about this season, if I'm removing my biased lenses and I'm just watching it, from an unbiased point of view, this is a completely different Houston Rockets team that we've seen in recent history, right? Like, it's not the James Harden show just doing everything. Like, they're actually playing defense now because I think they have to. Trading away Clint Capella was like, okay, we actually have to try now. If we're getting rid of our big, everyone has to compete on defense. James Harden is averaging 2 steals a game right now in the playoffs, and he's guarding bigs and doing a really good job. Like, their defense swarms to the ball, and they stop penetration. They actually, for the most part, get more points in the paint than their opponents do, so it's not all coming from outside. And Harden struggled in game 2, and they still won. So this is not your grandpa's, if you will, or we'll just say your dad, right? Because Harden hasn't been in the league that long, right? This is not your dad's Houston Rockets team. This is a completely different Houston Rockets lineup, and they're being coached differently. D'Antoni, I don't think, is getting enough credit for how he's coached them in the bubble so far with all the roster shifts that they've had and the aggressive defense and rebounding that they're giving. Right now, if you look, the Rockets only had 2 fewer points in the paint than their win, but actually, even in their loss, they outscored the Oklahoma City Thunder by 10 in points in the paint. So it's not all coming from outside despite their size, right? And they're hanging with them in the rebounding figures. It's just, you can't take whatever bias that you have on James Harden coming into this playoff series or maybe even in the foreseeable future, because he's trying on the defensive end and he has teammates like you mentioned, Eric Gordon stepping up, Jeff Green, Austin Rivers has had a couple really nice games. Like, this is not Daniel House, another guy, is averaging 17 points in the last 2 games, right? So this is not the Houston Rockets team that we grew up watching. This is not your dad's Houston Rockets team.
Right.
I'll just keep saying that.
I agree wholeheartedly. One thing about Harden's defense that you hear from players around the league is that, you always hear about how strong he is. He's one of the strongest guys in the NBA. And other players have flat out said it before. He used to not try on defense. They said it flat out that he just didn't care about defense. And, obviously he's flipped that switch and he's trying now, and you see he can play defense. He can keep up with guys. He does get quite a few steals. And, to the point of not being able to thrive with him as their number one option. This, like you said, they're using him as the number one option in a completely different way. They still initiate all their offense from him driving, but the number one option now is for him to find a shooter and for them to move the ball. It used to be Harden was going to take it in and try to draw, 15 fouls a game. He still gets to the line a lot, but he's definitely transitioned to looking for his teammates more than just to try to take it in over and over again.
Absolutely, and this is a team that if you're the Lakers, right, and we'll talk about them here in just a second, but if you're the Lakers, right now, who would you rather see? Would you rather see Oklahoma City or Houston?
Well, Chris Paul scares me a lot because he's always killed the Lakers, and I don't know, it might just be me remembering how good he was when he was with the Hornets back when they were in New Orleans. He just used to light us up it seemed like every year. But obviously I think they would rather see Oklahoma City than Houston. I think just about anybody in the NBA would rather see Oklahoma City than Houston right now, especially if Westbrook comes back, just because Houston does everything a little bit differently than most every team in the NBA. They've completely hung their hat on this different style of offense, on this small ball lineup, on, a lot of full court defensive pressure I've seen in the last couple of games. And those are just things you don't see as much in the NBA. And teams are always a little bit more prepared for what they know and more comfortable with what they know versus, the Lakers. Who is JaVale McGee supposed to guard?
He's not going to guard Jeff Green, who's been bringing the ball up the court.
Exactly. He's, you can't rely on him to be 30 feet from the basket and locking somebody down. He's a valuable piece as a rim protector on defense and not a whole lot more. But
he's better up against Steven Adams than he is Jeff Green or Robert Covington.
Exactly. And the Oklahoma City has a little bit more of a traditional roster, and the Lakers have a very big roster. They do play really fast up and down the court, the Lakers do, so I don't know how much the small ball lineup will hurt them, but I think Houston's definitely more dangerous than Oklahoma City. Yeah,
because especially with Westbrook coming back, you're going to have two guards that you're not going to be able to cover if you're the Lakers, right? Like if they've given up games to Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, and again, we'll talk about them here in a little bit, Westbrook does not care who's in front of him. He's going after the basket. Harden is going to dance around whoever's in front of him and draw the fouls. It's going to be really difficult for the Lakers. Not saying they can't win that series, right? I still think that they would. I'd like to give LeBron James and AD the pass over that series, but to go against one set of dynamic playmaking guards to another one when that's your clear weakness on the defensive end, this you would much rather see, Chris Paul and have AD against Gallinari and, whoever, McGee or Howard up against Adams. And the Lakers will kill Houston in the half-court set. You're probably right, Alan, and that's what we're saying. Like the Lakers would probably destroy Houston on that end, but there's another team that's applying as much effort and pressure and strategy and tactics into the game as the Lakers. It's not just going to be LeBron saying, okay, like I'm activating playoff mode and everybody's going to do what I tell them to on both teams, right? Like it's the Houston Rockets are going to give them issues on some ends of the defense, right? And that, to me, that's undeniable. Like you can't excuse away what Houston could do to the Lakers' perimeter defense.
Right. And whether you like him or not, or what anybody else thinks, I can tell you with almost certainty, James Harden thinks he's the best player in the world. That. And Houston thinks that they belonged in the NBA Finals at least once in the last couple of years. So the last thing they're going to do is roll over and die just because they're playing LeBron and the Lakers.
And excellent transition. We can talk about LeBron and the Lakers now. They are obviously playing the Portland Trail Blazers, the other half of the first seeds that had an upset against the 8th seed, this time in the Western Conference against the Portland Trail Blazers. And what a precedence that sets, right, for the NBA. The first time they have a play-in tournament, the team that won it, on the outside looking in, played into the 8th seed. They were able to hold off the 9th seed, and then they get the upset all in 1 year. I mean, that sets a huge precedent going forward. But in the last two games, it hasn't been that Cinderella feel at all for the Portland Trail Blazers, losing on the 20th, 111 to 88. Ouch. And then a very close game that took some late game heroics from the Lakers, 116 to 108, which happened yesterday. Austin, what are your takeaways from this?
Well, something that you pointed out big time that I really agree with is the Lakers are playing like the best team in the West. They're playing like the 1 seed again. And, rumors of their demise were greatly over-exaggerated. I was the one that even said I was worried. And, I wasn't lying. I was a little bit worried. But needed to do in game 2, which has come out with an extremely of intensity. They kind of blew Portland's doors off right off the beginning of the game, and they still weren't really shooting that well. It was they got every rebound. They were crashing the offensive glass. They were playing extremely physical and solid defense. They showed you why they were the number 1 seed in the West. A couple quick stats. The 2 games. The Lakers actually outshot Portland in both of the wins, believe it or not, even though I just said they didn't shoot the ball that well. That I think you have to give credit to their defense on that aspect because
100%.
Because they still really haven't shot the ball that well. Only 36 and 33% from deep. 36 is good. 33 is still lower than you'd like to be. A big difference is the free throw line, and it was a huge glaring difference in the first half of game 3.
Exactly.
LeBron, I think, had like 17 free throw attempts, and they just you said it, it's not just about LeBron activating playoff mode. I actually just posted an article today called LeBron Activates Playoff Mode. And so, go over and check that out if you want to, guys. But basically, I think what I saw in that game, Gary Trent Jr. got a couple of iffy offensive foul calls on LeBron. He was barking at the refs early. He was getting hit every time he went to the basket. And then about 8 minutes left in the second quarter, he got hammered by Nurkic and made the and one and kind of brushed himself off. And right in that moment, you could just see that, he was ready to take over. And and he did. And it woke him up a little bit. So, if Portland has anyone to blame, it's Gary Trent Jr. because you could see in that game LeBron was obviously annoyed by him. And he really turned it on in a game where Anthony Davis didn't really look too good for the first three quarters. He, obviously took over in the fourth quarter, but that's why you need two legitimate guys that can do it for you like that. And that's where I think the Lakers, the Rockets, and the Clippers have a big advantage over just about anybody else that's left is, two guys on each of those teams can get it done in the closing minutes when you need them to. And, in game 2, AD carried LeBron. In game 3, LeBron carried AD. And, it's if they can go back and forth like that, and KCP, he obviously... He
came back, didn't he? Everybody was giving him a hard time, right?
He redeemed himself for sure. Danny Green's still not looking great, but he played a little bit better. The Lakers are going to be in every game they play just off of how good their defense is. And you've got to give credit to Portland, though, too. They're undermanned. They're running about a 7 or 8 guy rotation right now, and even that's shortened. I mean, their 5 starters are playing so much, it's crazy.
And they have been since the bubble started, even to be where they are right now, right?
And a really cool stat that I just heard that is telling about how tough of an out Portland is. They've trailed in the fourth quarter in 11 of their 12 games since the season restarted.
They've been playing playoff basketball for a long time. Absolutely, yeah.
They've won the majority of those games, so they're not giving up on anybody. They're not, looking at the Lakers saying, "Oh, they're the 1 seed and we're the 8." They think they can beat them.
Yeah, and you had to think that they felt like they had a chance in Game 3. And you talked about we'll focus on the 2 superstars for Los Angeles, right? Anthony Davis has averaged 30 and 11 over the past 2 games, both wins. Obviously, a clear improvement on his Game 1 performance. LeBron, surprisingly, in Game 2, I say he only had 10, 7, and 6, but bounced back with a huge Game 3, logging 38, 12, and 8. And it was quite different for the Portland Trailblazers, obviously. More of the same for the superstars in Portland, actually, because Damian Lillard only had 18 in Game 2, kind of, alongside LeBron James struggling in that game. But he had 34 in Game 3, coming back off of what seemed like a left, index finger injury, and came back really strong. Melo and McCollum had 20 or more in Game 3. But CJ in game 2 only had 13, and Melo only had 2 in Game 2. Those are numbers you just can't have if you're looking to upset a number 1 seed, right? And the Lakers shot 7 and 9% better than Portland in both of those games. And what really spoke to me at first was that in Game 3, the 43 attempts from the line and only making 28. Compared to the 18 of 19 that the Blazers had. At first, when I started seeing people complain about this stat, and Alan, just want to say thanks for the support, brother, and thank you for the kind words, and we'll be looking to see more feedback from you, man. Have a good day. The Lakers had so many attempts, and at first when I look at this, I was thinking, oh, it must be because, the Trailblazers are attempting all their shots are coming from outside. That really wasn't the case, Austin. It was they only had 5 more attempts from downtown than the Lakers, right? And had 4 less fouls called. So how do you account for the 43 attempts from the line compared to the 19 that the Blazers had?
I just think LeBron is really the biggest difference there in that game, especially. I mean, he took it in full speed ahead over and over and over in that first half. And the only time you saw him anybody even come close to be able to even slow him down was when Nurkic pretty much grabbed him before he was even able to jump.
Right.
And that's pretty much what you have to do. Even now at 35 years old, he's as big as Karl Malone was when he played, and he's playing point guard. And,
yeah, he's playing a very different style of play.
Right. And so him barreling down the lane is not easy to stop. It's almost impossible to stop. And when he gets it in his head that he's going to take it in time and time again, he's going to eventually get more foul calls than not. I think Portland's game plan coming into Game 3 seemed like they wanted to try to make the game more physical, to try to maybe get in their head or under their skin. I'm not sure. But I think that plays right into the Lakers' hands because they are just so much bigger and more athletic almost across the board. Obviously, Game 2, Portland laid an egg. They didn't show up for that game. Game 3, they all looked much better. Carmelo had a big run in the third quarter. You got to give credit for that. He was starting to look like the Carmelo of old. For a minute there, he hit 3 or 4 shots in a row, and I just remember thinking to myself, here he goes. He's going to, we're looking at, his signature performance. And he did have a good game. And I just think that the Lakers took a lot of big punches from Portland in Game 3 and just, they just kept on them. They stayed for some reason. Portland just couldn't quite get over the hump. The Lakers, held them down. They played great defense again. I still would like to see Waiters play a little bit more. And I hear everybody saying that, he doesn't play a lot of defense and that's why, but they've got an incredibly good defense and they've got a lot of good defensive players on that team. They could give him some minutes to try to spark the offense a little bit more if they still feel like they need to. So I would like to see him play a little bit more. Lillard, McCollum, they both played really well in Game 3. And, I just think Portland's starting to look like they might be running out of gas a little bit.
Yeah, and that's a fair take. I still think they have one more game in them. I've been saying this from the get, Austin. You remember that. I think they have the people on their team. They have the dogs on the squad that can put up 2 games on anybody. It's not just the Lakers and how they match up. I think Portland is at full strength, and right now they're not even at full strength. They still don't have Trevor Ariza, who's been out for family issues, and then Rodney Hood has been injured for quite a while, right? So they're still not even at full strength, and they can still.
Collins is out again now too.
And Collins is hurt again too, absolutely. So they still have enough people, even still despite those absences and injuries, to put up a couple games on one of the best teams in the entire NBA. And one more thing that speaks to the Lakers' success is that with those 2 games combined, they have 20 more points in the paint between those 2 games than the Portland Trail Blazers, and that speaks a lot to the success that the Lakers have.
Right, and I think that's definitely their recipe for success is pounding teams in the paint and scoring around the rim and getting out in transition, getting easy buckets. They do have to rely pretty heavily offensively on LeBron and AD, so as many easy baskets as they can get, the more the merrier. I just think it bodes well that they won going away on LeBron's maybe worst playoff performance in at least 7 or 8 years, if not of his career.
Are you speaking of Game 2?
Yes.
Okay.
Game 2, when they won Game 2, even though LeBron, at least statistically, did not play well at all.
Right.
But obviously, like I said, it's the picture's been circulating around social media and on ESPN. I'm sure a lot of seen it of him with that glare in his eye, and it reminds me a lot of the look on his face when he was in Miami and he had that 45-point game 6 against Boston. He just kind of had that look like no one's going to stop me, and I'd like to see that more from him. I think everybody would. I think that's one of the big knocks on LeBron is they always say he doesn't have a killer instinct or he passes a little bit too much. I think you saw in Game 3 that he was looking for his own shot. He wasn't settling for 27-footers at the top of the key. He was taking good threes. That's why he made 50% of his threes. And he was attack first and got the defense on their heels, and it opened up the game a little bit more for him. And I mean, you can't hardly knock the guy, but I would like to see it more often from him. But I think it bodes well for the Lakers' chances going forward that he's this locked in already.
Yeah, that scowl is definitely something that you don't want to see if you're on the opposing team of a LeBron James-led roster, right?
Right.
And to his credit, I think that they still have the Lakers, that is, they still have some things that they need to improve on. Obviously, you can't bank on getting 43 attempts at the free throw line every night. I don't remember another team having that many attempts in the playoffs so far, especially when you're starting to ramp up against levels of competition. So I think Portland is a good first team for the Lakers to play against because, one, they should still be able to beat them, but the Blazers are also a good team to test their mettle, a team that they have to try against and figure out who is serviceable where. I still think that Waiters, like you said earlier, should be getting a little bit more playing time. He just has to be in there with the right people. You still have to have good defense around Waiters.
Right.
Even if you have a couple minutes where you don't have a great defensive supporting cast, maybe offensively Waiters is enough to keep your head above water while you're resting some of your better defensive players, right? Overall, though, I think that the Lakers are doing what I expected them to from the first game. I didn't expect Portland's first victory and only victory so far to come in game 1. I thought you would maybe see maybe like game 2 and game 5, something like that. But the Lakers right now, they're performing like a number 1 seed in the Western Conference, and LeBron has had 2 of the 3 games, looks like an MVP. And and one thing I want to say again is that, while the Lakers are winning, LeBron is getting all of the credit, right? But when they lose, we need to steer away from bashing Anthony Davis and Frank Vogel, because no one is giving Frank Vogel credit for the adjustments that he's made in Game 3 to ensure that the Lakers won, right? No one is saying, hey, Anthony Davis, great game, way to be that best second banana. Everybody's saying LeBron James won them that game. And rightfully so. He had a huge game, not trying to take any of that away from him at all in the slightest. He is still one of, if not the best players on the planet. We just need to keep it 100 on both ends, right? Like, we need to give credit where credit is due and shift blame where blame is due. It's not always LeBron James supporting cast's fault. Speaking back to that game 1 loss, he and AD shot 1 of 10 from deep and missed 8 free throws in a very close game. So,
right.
Yeah, go ahead.
You made a really good point. We don't know what goes on in the locker room. For all we know, Frank Vogel went to LeBron and said, hey, we need you to look for your shot more tonight. It could be, give him the credit. So you're right about that, And I don't want anyone to think that I think LeBron is solely the reason that the Lakers won that game. I think LeBron had a sequence in the first half there that sparked the whole team, in 3 at least, to, the intensity level picked up right from that point forward. You could see the guys on the bench kind of got a little bit more into the game when he had that big and one, and he pounded his chest, and I know there's no fans in the stands, but that was a big moment for momentum for the Lakers, I think. And going forward in the playoffs, obviously the competition's going to get stiffer. But from one aspect, what you said about the free throws was intriguing. I think the size advantage and the rebounding advantage that they have over a team like Houston could be forced into a lot of foul trouble in that series as well. I don't know. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, in the game in the bubble earlier, it didn't happen that way. But I think the Lakers are going to be an extremely difficult matchup for anybody.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And again, I'm not trying to shift blame to LeBron when he loses and take credit away from LeBron when he and his team win. I'm just saying that we have to keep it even kill on both ends. LeBron had a great game 3, and we start seeing those. And the only reason I brought this up, Austin, was you mentioned that we start seeing those pictures circulate of the scowl and everything like that. We don't hear anyone saying, hey, Frank Vogel did a great job making an adjustment in the fourth quarter to ensure that the Lakers won, or hey, Anthony Davis, had these key plays that contributed to the win.
Look at the huge fourth quarter Anthony Davis had. Nobody's even talking about it.
Exactly. Everyone's saying LeBron James won them that game, which, again, he was a big reason for that, but he's not the only one, right? So, and that's something that we need to consider when we're talking about a team that has LeBron James as their best player. So, and Austin, real quick, I just want to give the folks an update. I think I just saw it was a 5-point lead with a little less than 2 minutes left for the Mavericks, looking to tie up the series 2-2 against the Clippers. It should be a great series, and we can talk about that when we record again on Wednesday. But
Right.
Austin, before we go, I just want to give you an opportunity to promote some of the work that you're doing with the Game Change Sports Network, and some things that you have going on there.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I did just started writing for this new site a couple days ago. I posted my first article yesterday. Go over and take a look at it. It's all about how I think the new look NBA schedule that they're possibly talking about for next year should become a permanent thing. Starting on Christmas Day, I've always been a fan of. You miss the first 2 months of the NBA season that's going on right in the middle of the football playoffs. You could lose that overlap. So go ahead and check that out. It's a pretty cool little idea I had there. It's gotten a lot of good feedback. Check out all the pages on the site. I told you about my other LeBron article. There's a lot of really talented guys over there on that site. We've got a ton of MMA coverage. I would say some of the best hockey coverage I've seen in quite a long time. Baseball, football, basketball, whatever you want, we have it. Go over there and check it out. Thanks for the support. Thanks for watching the show. We do this because we love it, but we also do it because, we know you guys, that listen to us like it and want to learn a little something. So hopefully we teach you something every week. Hopefully we give you a stat or, a way of thinking about something that you didn't think of before. So I just want, again, to thank you for the opportunity to be on the show and everybody for listening.
Yeah, Austin, and again, I tell you this offline and here on the show, I'm super glad that I have you as my co-host. It's awesome to have someone that I can talk shop with like this, who don't think I'm crazy for liking the NBA as much as I do, obsessed, if you will, even at points. But ultimately, it's just it's a pleasure and a hobby for both of us to be able to do this. As for me, I have 3 articles that I posted up on offtheballnetwork.com. I have my big board for collegiate prospects and international prospects that are looking to get drafted this year, and then I have my mock draft rounds 1 and 2. They're separate pieces that are available on the website. So please go check them out and check out all the other stuff that we have going on too. A bunch of great work about the collegiate football season, the outlook on that, and what we can expect to see. Some work on, some recent moves that the Cowboys have done. I know that there's a lot of Cowboy fans out in the world. I myself am not one of them, but it is what it is. Right. We have another big board that our Chris LeBron put up about who he thinks are the best prospects, so you can get a little bit of diametrically opposed viewpoints. And we'll be putting out some more content soon. We got videos and stuff where we all do live videos, which is always a good time. Even if you're not a sports fan, you should go check it out just to see us bust on each other. It's a lot of fun.
I've watched a little bit of it. They are a lot of fun to watch. They're pretty funny guys. So definitely go over there and check that out. And I just want to say about you real quick. I've seen the work you put in on your big board and on your mock drafts. Go check that out. He's done a lot of great work on that. I haven't seen Chris's, but I know him. I'm sure his is great too. So, these guys put in a lot of hard work on that stuff. That's something that I marvel at because that's hard for me, is evaluating the draft and doing a big board. So, I got to give you guys props for that for sure.
Well, I appreciate it, man. And before we go, we just want to let you know, the listener, that or the viewer, if you're watching or listening now or later, your voice can be heard here on the show. Let us know when we go live. Like, we've had a few people come in and say hey today and give some great feedback. If you want to email us, you can email us at breakingthegamepodcast@gmail.com, and we'd love to just have that dialogue with you here on the show. You can follow us on Twitter at BTG NBA Pod, and you can do the same thing on Instagram at BTG NBA Pod. Thanks for the assist there, Austin. And we appreciate all the viewership, the listeners, all the support and love that we get from you guys. Is what makes us want to keep doing this, 2 times a week. And we look forward to continuing that professional and personal relationship with each other, Austin. And before we go, just say something nice to the folks.
Hey, like I said, thank you for listening. Thank you for taking time out of your day to listen to us ramble about basketball. Like Steven said, it is nice to have somebody to talk to that doesn't think you're crazy. But we really do it for you guys as well. Go watch some basketball. There's a lot of good games on. This game that's going on right now, try to catch the end of it.
Yeah, 25 seconds left. It's tied 121, and the Clippers are getting the ball.
So we're going to get off here so you can go ahead and finish watching that game. Have a good night, everybody.
Yep, and this has been the Breaking the Game podcast. Our audience have been awesome. We will catch up with you guys next time. Much love, everybody.
Have a good one.